Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day.
Let's go ahead and sing. I invite you to rise in body or spirit.
Faith made strong, the rafters will withstand the battering of the storm. This earth, though all the world grow will keep you warm. Peace shall walk softly through these rooms, touching our lips with holy wine, till every casual corner blooms into a shrine. With laughter drown the raucous shout, and though these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep hate out and hold love in.
So welcome to the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge. One of the mics is hot. Brian, it might be this one. I'm going to move our skeleton friend. The staff adopted him last year, named him Lurch, and they've put him in many places, both appropriate and not. Last week, he was in the bathroom. Anyway, today we're going to be playing with that. Welcome to the Unitarian Church. My name is Nathan. I'm so pleased to welcome you today. Reverend Chris is still on vacation in the great world of women's volleyball up in Madison, Wisconsin. He wasn't there 2 weeks ago. He was at an installation, but he is now fully immersed in women's volleyball. He will be back next week. During middle hour, welcome online too. Those who are local, you're welcome to drive in for middle hour. We have a social justice from the UU perspective. That is in room 6. Don't listen to me. 6. And we also have, actually, Salvatore, do you want to come up and tell us about Samhain? Salvatore, how long have you been a member of the church? 9 years? Come on.
At least 10.
At least 10.
Coming for like 15. I get the pulpit. Hey, my name is Salvatore Collada. A year ago, we started the Six Source Sharing Circle in the church to give UU pagans a place to kind of just explore earth-centered spiritualities, or give people here a chance to explore earth-centered spiritualities and living as a pagan and a UU. We're wrapping up our first year. As part of that, we're doing a Samhain ritual next weekend, Saturday at 6 o'clock here. It'll be a time to remember our ancestors, where we're going, where we came from. And yeah, please come if you would like. Bring something to remember your ancestors. And we're having a reception afterward. Feel free to bring something or not. In middle hour, Canova is going to be having a discussion on ancestral traditions and recognizing ancestors under the umbrella of those traditions.
What should I what should I wear to the Samhain ritual?
Whatever you want.
So what I feel comfortable in
Yes.
doesn't. Okay.
Bring your authentic self.
Do I need to be pagan to attend?
No.
Okay. When you say something that reminds something for an altar,
We'll have an altar set up as we process to the ritual space. You can lay there a photo, a memento, or something. I'm bringing a wine cask that my great-grandfather brought with him fishing off of Sicily.
Thank you. And because it is Halloween weekend and we're thinking about death, Tuesday marks the death of the pledge drive. People have told me not to say that. What I mean by that is currently we have about 75, 80 pledges in. We need 225. Mine's not in, but it will be by the end of today. I can make up all kinds of excuses, but I'm just trying to model for people that we should all have it in by October 31st. And if you want to turn off us asking you if you've turned in your pledge, get it in by Tuesday. And then we're not going to talk to you. Well, we'll talk to you plenty, but we won't ask you if your pledge is in after that. And there's actually, Janet, would you stand up just and wave at everyone? Janet helped run the pledge drive. There's all kinds of tables and things. And because they're going to ring a bell if you turn in your pledge. Online people, Janet just stood up, and if you really wanted to know what Janet looked like, or at least what her name looked like, we almost have you. So we have Janet, who's running the pledge drive, and to do our testimonial today, the other person who is running the pledge drive is Jane, no T. So Jane, would you come up and tell us a little more? And I'm going to hold the skeleton.
Well, right. I was going to start off introducing myself as the co-chair with Janet, and I guess what you need to know is that Janet started off the month of October with her statements to you on the first Sunday in October, and it seems only appropriate that the other half of the co-chairs would end the month of October pledge drive with the statements. So that's what I'm here for. My husband, Rick, who is sitting right up there in front, and I moved to Lake Charles, Louisiana in early 2019 after a good 5 or 6 years of being very active members of the church. The decision was driven by the fact that our 4 youngest grandchildren live in Lake Charles, and we just felt like we needed to be more completely a part of their lives. It was not an easy decision leaving you. It truly wasn't. If good things can come out of the pandemic, then the great thing that came out of the pandemic for us was that this church decided to keep an online service. So we are with you every Sunday morning online. Our committee at the beginning of this, back in March, made a decision that we wanted on this pledge drive to help you connect what you love about this church to your willingness to fund the church. So with that in mind, then, I need to tell you about us. We have always loved and appreciated, particularly because it's the 2 committees that we both worked in a lot, the congregational care team and the social justice teams. That was where a lot of our energies occurred, and we love those too. But since this church has made a commitment to funding the online service as well, and it's a major thing for us, then that is an added reason. The committee had asked that you connect what you love, what you really care about, to your funding. So that's the core of our decision. From 130 miles west of here, we have continued to fully support this church for that reason. But beyond that, Rick says that he wants to ensure that UCBR remains a thriving and welcoming church for future generations. So that's another reason why we continue our full support. If you haven't already pledged yet, remember this is your church. And please join us today by making a pledge that will help keep UCBR alive and thriving through the generations. Thank you.
It was not just Rick, Jane, and Janet. It was a whole team of people who helped make this happen. What you need to know is as of Tuesday, the pledge drive goes dormant. We can't have a budget until we get all 225 pledges in, so it just goes into a not from up here stage, but a checking in on anyone who hasn't turned in their pledge yet stage. We have 2 cards for you to know about. One is for Luna Broussard. She had a stroke. She is not a member of the church. She's recovering, as well as one could recover after a stroke that I know of. But she was a member of this church, back in the 70s? And she then decided to pursue Unitarian Universalist ministry, and she's now a retired UU minister. So we're going to send a card to her. And also, if you would place a stone, we have the death of a mother of a church member. Tanya Nyman's mother, Ethel Ann Sonny Nyman, died this past week, and so we are thinking of her. This ritual we have is open to everybody, visitor and member alike, online or not. We invite those who wish to come forward either along the west or the east wall, take a stone, place it in the chalice bowl. We now invite those who wish to come forward as we place stones.
And we say together, with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, through every land, by every tongue.
Just as the birds sing differently because you are there, you live differently for the presence of birds. That's not a poetic notion, but an ecological fact. I live in a rust-colored landscape of low hills and thin creeks, teeming with the creatures of Appalachia and coursing with the rhythms of how life is here. Your landscape may be different. How we live plays a part in what happens out there, and what happens out there plays a part in our lives. But landscape isn't sewn only from the fabric of space. We also inhabit a landscape of time, the grassy patch of a day, the rough meadow of a year, the old-growth forest of a decade, with the light pouring in. When the pandemic hit, my calendar dissolved like sugar in water. Days and weeks ran together. I stopped changing my clothes. For a while, I'm told my hygiene was not very good. In October, a friend of mine died. I wanted to rewind the tape to get to say all the things I'd been meaning to say. But then someone said he was in the arms of the eternal. And that made me think, because eternity is a word that can mean different things. It can be an endless duration, the train on its tracks chugging ineluctably forth with no stations ahead. But it can also be the expanse to either side of those tracks, the wilderness there, the ocean beyond. Is this second, ever-present eternal, the wilderness and the ocean, I'm learning to visit. Prayer makes a trail to it. So can a dream, or sweeping the kitchen if it's mindfully done. All our beloved dead are there, as is that within us and the world which we'd counted as lost, and all that is yet to be. Who can say how you've been hurtling through all these days, from morning to night? All of it such a far cry from what you had planned. All I know is that the wilderness alongside every moment, sprawling in each direction, holds more than the silence that theologians imagine of God. Listen. There's something like birdsong, sweeter for the simple, holy fact of your life. It calls even now from the forested edge of the day to awaken that within you which has always been there, so you know what to follow as you make your way home.
So welcome to Halloween Sunday at this church. You may have not experienced this, but for me, there are 3 or 4 magic holidays. These are holidays where the very air itself feels like it changes. For me, these holidays are Christmas, Mardi Gras, sometimes Easter, and Halloween. Does anyone else have this experience? Okay, so there's a few of you. So the few of us, we have this experience. When I was a kid at my little Unitarian church in Lacombe, I still remember my minister talking about Halloween as it relates to Taoism. She said that right now the veil is thinnest between the living and the dead. And this is true in many religions, but she said on the yin-yang, where the white and the black are barely indistinguishable from each other, that is where we are now in the year. At this time of year, at this magic time, you may actually be able to contact those who have come before. I tend to think that there is a natural liturgical arc to life. Theologians study that arc and then overlay holidays and festivals on top of that. So, for example, December is a really tough time for a lot of people. So many religions have put a celebration of light on top of it. Halloween is the time of year when we dance with and play with things that frighten us. This is a healthy tendency. It helps us to make sense of the world, and so today we're going to play with death. This one has been hard for me. Not death itself, well, I guess yes, that too, but this particular skeleton, because the staff has put it in all sorts of very weird places, some of which have actually startled me. So they said we're going to put him on the chancel today, and if anyone really wants him taken down, we can, but other than that, we'll have the specter of Halloween behind us. I know that as a culture, that we live in a culture now that has sterilized death. It has taken it out of our homes and our families and placed it into hospitals or facilities so that we do not have to face it. We have even adopted theologies that mean we no longer have to wrestle with the realities of death. For many religions, the promise that if you join their particular faith, death is a mere inconvenience. It's a blip that if you believe the right way, you will transcend that and still be alive and be with your family. But what that does is it robs us of wrestling with one of the most sacred events in every person's life. Bearing in mind that sacred does not necessarily mean fun or happy or joyful. It's complicated, but it's still sacred. Entering the world from mystery and leaving the world back into mystery are both sacred events. So today, we as a religious community are going to wrestle with death. I know some people are uncomfortable with the topic. If that is you, just please try and stick with us. Coming to terms with mortality is one of the greatest religious gifts we have. And I know for some of you, probably many, thinking about or wrestling with death can bring back old traumas. It is okay. If you need to take a break from this, you can. Rest assured that we're going to go, with the exception of Lurch over here, respectfully through the topic. We're going to play with it, but we're going to do so respectfully. And when I write these sermons, I always forget to put in a transition to the offering. So next is the offering. I write this thing like 4 times, and I put the offering there, so I know it's there. And anyway, this month is a 5-Sunday month, which means there is no. I've been actually pitting y'all against each other. Do you know I've been telling 11:30 bad things about you and what you're giving? It's not entirely true. Yeah, you've heard it. But I'm going to continue this lie to try to get as much money split with Youth City Labs as we can. So here's the lies I'm going to tell. I asked you to give, and 11:30 said you wouldn't. I don't know why 11:30 thinks you won't give. Maybe they're a bunch of mean people. Not been my experience, but maybe that's true. It's not, but maybe it is. And they also said that you all each carried $300 bills in your wallet. I don't know why, but that's what they look. Look, this is some cable news strategy right here. I have just heard, not saying it's true, I have just heard that you all have hundreds of dollars of bills that you could place in the offering plate, and half of it will go to Youth City Labs. I have also heard the Saints are doing terrible, and I've also heard that LSU is not doing great. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Youth City Labs does amazing stuff. This church does great stuff. The offering is not the pledge drive. Pledge drive is how we actually fund the church. A portion of the budget, about $12,000 of the $700,000 budget, comes from the offering plate. So that is not how we build the church. This is a spiritual practice, but it is how we give generously to the community. So with that, I will ask you to give very generously as this morning's offering is given and received.
God, I have so many emotions about this. When was your mother born? Just answer the screen, Dora the Explorer style. When was your mother born? Okay, now go to like a week before that. That is how long you have existed as an egg cell. I have existed at least as an egg cell since 1963 because mammals are born with all of the egg cells they get. You were a part of your mother's body when your mother's body was a part of your grandmother's body. You are not distinct from all mankind. You are not distinct from the entire tree of life. People will be asking stuff like, scientifically, does life begin at conception? Scientifically, life doesn't begin. Life on Earth began exactly once, and since then it has not begun one single time. You are a leaf on a tree that has been growing for billions of years. You're also not distinct from the planet Earth. Like, do you think these are your carbon atoms? Do you think they're your nitrogen atoms? You are borrowing them. And one day you're gonna have to give them back. You're a piece of a planet that got up and looked at stuff for a little while. Hug a tree, call your mom.
So the medium of watching that on your phone makes it communicable. She talked so fast, that's actually slowed down to 80% so that you could hear it. For those who missed it, because that was very fast, she said that the egg cell that created you was in your mom from when your mom was created. So you are not as old as you are. You are actually, in terms of the cells in your body, as old as your mom was as old as. And she was, and that we are not indistinguishable. We weren't born, we're a leaf growing out of a tree of life, that life happened exactly once. You could probably Google that and find it and consume it in the medium it was intended to be. Well, actually, online people, you probably saw that just fine. You're like, why is this going so slow? But for us in here, it was like very fast and very loud. So we have come to the theology portion of the service. Next, we're going to do the logistics. This is the close your eyes and feel part. The next is the actual, like, take notes. I'm going to tell you how to not get scammed by a funeral home. Well, hope you can't. But, so as a quick reminder, this is a church without a belief requirement. So how you make sense of your life is where your belief comes from, and we do not require you to believe a certain thing. For me, I tend to think of God, one of the ways I tend to think of God is as the collection of all of our experiences and understandings. So everyone who ever was and everyone who ever will be, if we could sort of collect all of those understandings of life and death and the afterlife and sort of take that continuum all the way to infinity, if you could get to that point, that would be how I articulate God. Does that make sense? Conceptually, like not like intrinsically. Yes? Okay. Throughout that articulation, wrestling with death and being comfortable with it, seeing it as part of the sacred part of life, that is how we live into that idea of God. The theologian who helped me the most understand death, sadly, and I say that because he died 2 weeks ago, is Michael Dowd. The work Michael Dowd and Kindly Barlow did gave me the language to understand us as a sacred mortal species. Because we spent plenty of time on their theology over the past few months, I will just quickly summarize. We are made of atoms. These atoms have existed since the beginning of time. They were a part of the Big Bang. They've made up stars and stardust and planets and soil and trees, and now they are making up us. And at some point, when we are no longer alive, those atoms will just disperse and go on to make other things. The air that you are breathing now contains oxygen molecules that people who have existed since the beginning of time have breathed. So pick whatever ancestor you love or hate, famous or not, you are breathing their air right now. For me, the understanding that we are all made up of these particles is how I make sense of living and dying. So that's sort of piece one. I'm going to offer you some sort of theological bites. That's bite one. Bite two is it is important that we acknowledge that we all take up space. I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard someone say that after they die, they don't want a memorial service. Usually this is an attempt to not bother people, and to not overburden them with their death. But ironically, that request actually adds to the burden. When I lived in Washington, D.C., it's a very dense city, it's usually full of strangers, either because they're short-time employees or they're like a few day or 1 week visitors. But the sheer number of anonymous people made it so that I could leave my house and feel completely anonymous, feel like I didn't exist. I could go out for like 4 or 5 hours and not talk to another human being. I don't feel like that here because this city is smaller, it's less dense, and I tend to run into all of you. Not yet. When I finish the DC part. We had scripted and I said ambiguously the DC part, but I meant the end. So, actually it did kind of sound reflective. All right, I'll get credit for that. But there was this one day I was riding on the metro, and I noticed something. I sat in one of the seats alone. I looked down at my phone or read the signs over the, all the ads or whatever. I didn't want to look at someone else to make them uncomfortable by, I guess, staring at them. And then I noticed every other person on the train, no matter where I was avoiding eye contact with me. Out of respect, I assumed. So I shifted seats, and their lack of eye contact shifted with me. I knew I existed because they wouldn't look at me. That was a cultural expression of existence among strangers in a very dense city. All of this is to say that even though you may not want to take up space, by virtue of existing, you do. Some of the most damage I've seen people do is when they don't acknowledge how much space they take up. People who take up more than their fair share of space, pretending they don't, can bump into people and do real harm. And people pretending like they aren't worth the space they take up, they make other people take up the space for them. Either way, as it relates to theology, by virtue of a decision you had no part in, by virtue of your existence, you are a part of this divine space, and you have a role in building God on this earth. And when you tell people not to have a memorial for you, you are dictating how they are supposed to grieve you. You don't have control over people loving you or missing you. So you need to own the space that you are in and let them love you.
I do not know where we go when we die, and I do not know what the soul is, or what death is, or when, or why. What I know is that the song once sung cannot be unsung, and the life once lived cannot be unlived, and the love once loved cannot be unloved.
Right where you're seated, let's sing this next hymn.
Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence comes. Peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and come, let all find tranquility. Bird fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view. us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shining, illuminate our inward view. Help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new sounds that become full symphonies.
Would you join me in a moment of prayer and reflection? The God that we know when we see love and hope and forgiveness and family, that great mystery named and unnamed, believed in and not, whatever it is that holds us together and pulls us towards love, be with us on this day. And hold the sacred space and let us be together and to be grateful for the existence of which we did not choose, but we are a part. And help us to hold all of those ancestors who came before us, the painful ones, the broken ones, the loving ones, the ones who shaped us, the ones who we wrestle with, and the ones we want to love and see again. Into this space, I invite you to say aloud, or if you're online, write into the chat, but to say aloud the names of people who are no longer with us. Speak those names now.
Courtney Grayson.
Hold these names and so many more so that we know we are all interconnected. So long as we are here, they are here too. Amen.
Bird fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view. Help us to sense life's mystery. Fly high and far and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity.
How to Write a Card by the Reverend Nancy Schaefer. And this was written while Reverend Schaefer was a patient in hospice. 1. Figure out if you're writing to another person or your own self. If to your own self, then simply write to yourself and don't send it to the person it's supposedly for. That probably goes for our emails too. Some clues that you're actually writing a card to your own self. You're reluctant to write, and then finally force yourself to write. You practice your note, crossing out simple words and phrasing and inserting more elaborate ones. The message is then intellectual rather than flowing. You say, "You must blank," and use words or phrases that indicate arduousness, tiredness, a heroic battle, military or game analogies. Question: does the person you think you're writing to actually see the engagement in these terms? and a note. Trying to imagine how the other, the card recipient, is feeling is a near impossible task. You may or may not be able to discern this. Err on the side of respectful caution, and don't presume feeling or stance. Instead, interrogate yourself about your assumptions. Where and how did you learn these? Are you suffering from any grief or regret in relation to people previously ill in your life? Then deal with this first. Don't just project your own stuff. All that will do is distance the other, when what you hope to do is support increased closeness. Don't make the recipient Don't make the recipient into a heroic figure who is doing the extraordinary. You may feel that way, but that's your stuff. If you make the other person into someone heroic, you're actually separating him or her from your embrace, which is the last thing that is helpful. 3, don't say, I couldn't do what you're doing. Really? You couldn't? Why not? Because you're a wimp? Because you think you haven't the strength? Because you mistakenly think it means looking into the abyss and you aren't ready for that? Well, work on these. Don't just project you are other. How the hell helpful is it to just separate? 4, bottom line, be present, be simple, right from the heart. But beware untended heart work of your own, which you've got to do first, so that you don't unintentionally cast the other aside and inflict the pain of separation. 5, if you can't kindly do something simple, just wait until you can. Take this as an opportunity to work on your own life and heart. It's better to send nothing than to send something hurtful. Don't presume you know the other's life. Think of what you actually know of the person. 6, color choices, images, skills, likes, life meaning. Find or make a particular card to reflect these. Send a direct kiss from the heart.
So the book that one is from, it's almost impossible to find. It was put out by our association's publishing. It's called While Still There Is Light. And what she did is for the last year of her life, she journaled every day for this book. And some of the times, so most books on grief, they sort of condense everything and tell you what you would experience, but she's actually angry in some, sad in some, happy in some, and every day it's kind of a little different. And that one, I don't know, I've always loved it. So let's get to the logistics. Actually, let me pause here because I forgot something, and I'm going to make this as disconnected as possible. I just wanted to acknowledge that a number of people helped make a Halloween party happen last night, and it was wonderful, and I just wanted to thank you before we go further in. So, yeah, you can all golf clap for that so we don't interrupt. So, the logistics. This is the note-taking part of the service. So I want to talk about this in 3 parts. Funeral home, memorial service, and then not disappearing. First of all, most deaths are expected. We tend to think of deaths as sudden or accidental, like a homicide, cardiac event, suicide, accident, but those are not the more common type of death. Most memorial services I do, most of the deaths that I see in this church have some amount of expectation with them. Usually it is people in hospice or people who are knowledgeable about their decline. And I tell you this to say that most people have an opportunity to do reconciliation and to plan for their death. But we live in a world where we are told to expect all deaths to be sudden deaths. If we are able to do our work before the time comes, usually we can leave people with a somewhat clear roadmap for what to do after you die, both logistically and emotionally. So I recommend have a conversation with the people you love the most. Have a will, but don't have your memorial plans in that will. Sometimes wills can get tied up, and sometimes your plans don't match reality. So what I mean, like, I'm not going to say the actual thing I had, but I've had people put in their will, this next part is made up, but that they wanted to be scattered at the public library or something. You don't have permission to be scattered at the public library. So don't put it in a legally binding document. Tell people what you want. But you don't have to put it into a will. Talk to your loved ones about what is important to you and what is not. Tell them about music you like, stories about yourself you like. Show them photos of yourself that make you happy. Tell them why they are important to you. And tell them songs you don't like. If I ever, when I die, if the song Imagine is in my memorial service, I am coming back to haunt the minister who did it. I know some of you love that song, but it is not mine. So tell people that, right? So then, after you die, when they hear that song, either that you hate or you loved, you can come back and be in their body physiologically when they hear that song. All right, even more logistics. Think of a funeral home like a used car dealership. They may seem like they are giving you a good deal, but they are trying to make a profit. Here are some of the funeral home tips and tricks from your minister. First, most white funeral homes are owned by one of two major national corporations. It is possible this is true for the black funeral homes as well. I just do not know that, so I cannot speak to that. In fact, I believe there's only one or two white funeral homes left in Baton Rouge that are not nationally owned. It is typically, I tell someone to expect about $3,000 from a cremation. One of those national chain ones just tried to push a family up to $5,000 for a cremation. There is a funeral home here that will do it for about $1,500. A burial will run you into the 5 digits, tens of thousands, if not more. And often they will pull every trick that a car dealer will pull to try to sell you a package. These include, but are not limited to, always having more people in the room than you bring with you. Having packages that are just slightly above the bare minimum. So you could either have a bare burial that no one cares about for $89.95, or for $91.50 you can get flowers and painting, and like that's a very intentional sales tactic. When they try to sell you a casket, they will always show you the most expensive and the prettiest, and they never have full versions of the cheapest ones. And they go out of their way to hint a little bit of shame if you choose the cheapest option. Their guest books run about $75. Their guest books are no more magic than the $7 one you could buy at the store. When they give you the invoice, question every line. They can drop thousands off if you are pushy, which they do not expect you to be when you are grieving. And if you are not able to do it, bring the meanest or most slick person you know to go with you. I'm serious. I've seen 4 people in the funeral home, in the meeting with a funeral director. They'll bring in 5. And not every funeral home, and it's not about an individual one, and these are working people who, some of them are just trying to keep their business afloat. You should also know funeral home directors have a powerful lobby in Louisiana. Do you know that there were some monks, I think it's St. Joseph Abbey, took the funeral directors to the Supreme Court because in the state of Louisiana, you were not allowed to sell a casket unless you belonged to a funeral, unless you were a funeral home. And they won. So we have a very powerful funeral home lobby. The green burial, like in Texas, you could be buried on your own land. There is no green burial option in Louisiana. You are also required to buy a case. Are y'all good? Is this too fast? Okay. You are required to buy a case if you're doing a burial, which is just a piece of cement that the casket goes into. You do not need to pay for embalming. There are any number of things a funeral home will try to sell you do not need to pay for. My usual advice after a death is to go slow. Your body physiologically will feel like there is a crisis. You have lowered brain capacity, your heart beats faster, your muscles are more tense, Your breath is more shallow. You don't have as much of an appetite. Also, if there's a sudden death, it typically takes about 2 years to come out of the fog. Not to get over it, not to finish grieving, just for life to start being visible again. The thing is, though, the only thing that makes grief more manageable is time. I tend to think of grief like a giant canvas laying on top of you. Every ritual and event that you do after a death, it's like another tent pole holding that grief up over you. If you use all of them at once, you then don't have any way to get through the grief later. Not anyway, but it's harder. My usual funeral home advice is to get in and get out as quickly as possible. You can always go back to a funeral home to plan a service or to get extra accommodations. In the same way, you shouldn't go to a grocery store when you're hungry. Funeral homes, when you're grieving, can cost you a lot of money. Also, this is super logistical. Buy a bunch of death certificates, like 10 to 15. They're like $10 each, and you need them for the funeral home is not going to upcharge you or shouldn't on death certificates, and you need them for all sorts of weird things, like your car, your insurance, Social Security, just list and list of things. And it's so much better to just have them and pass them off than to have to go back to the funeral home and get more. They also don't upcharge you usually on an obituary, although they are very expensive in the paper. I tend to think of an obituary like an archival document. You don't need to put all of the things in there. You need to put things so that people in the future can know who this person was. Also, you can negotiate hard with funeral homes. You can even demand that they moved your loved one's body to a different facility. They hate that. I'm not as good at negotiating. Your minister emeritus, Steve, used to actually go out of the room, go find the director of the funeral home and say, we're leaving unless you take $2,000 off the amount. Like, you can negotiate hard with them. Another thing to think about now, rather than in the moment, is if you have a loved one who's going to be cremated, consider going to it. Whenever I mention this to a grieving family, they almost always seem shocked or afraid in some way. I have seen many people go, and I have never seen someone regret going. Usually it gives them a sense of completion. There is no right way to grieve, so I'm not saying you should or shouldn't go, but this may be a step to help you in your grieving process. As it relates to memorial services, my advice is always to take time. There is no need to rush. I have found 3 months is kind of the sweet spot. You are in a different stage of grief than you are right after death. Waiting means that 1, more people can plan and come. 2, the memorial service can really tell a good story while you're not in that crisis mode. And 3, it can give you some of the nourishment that you're going to need to make it through that next chapter of grief in a profound way. So I actually usually don't worry about grieving families from about 3 days after the death till about a month after the death. Because a month after the death is about when your average acquaintance is going to decide that you should be done grieving, right? And that's when it can become the hardest part. After a death, one of the ministers will usually meet with the family. We'll usually do it in one of our offices. We have you tell the story of their life, and then we ask you questions and we help you craft the service. And remember, a good memorial service is not about perfection. It is just about us thinking about the person collectively for an hour. All you have to do is have an idea of who you want to speak, who you don't want to speak, what music and readings that person liked. While you're grieving, channel all of that doing energy into going through photographs and finding good pictures or things to put on an altar or something like that. When thinking about your own memorial service, think about 2 things. One is, what are the music, readings, photos that you want in your service? Leave a folder with them and leave too many things in them. There was a Janetta Creel, when she died, she had a folder that she had called Memorials. And it was full of like poems and hymn numbers and everything, and her family just opened it up and they got to pick what they wanted because they knew that's what she wanted. And the second thing, Think about the stories you want people to tell about you at your memorial service. One of the advantages of being a minister and being in all of those memorial counseling sessions is I am well aware and always think about it whenever I'm failing as a parent or a partner or a minister or a friend. How you act now will show up in your memorial service. Invest in living the loving and generous life you want to lead now, because it makes a better memorial experience for those you love. Like, I know that's funny, but I cannot tell you how hard people work to tell a good story about you. I mean, like, they really, really want to, because they really love you, and they really want the story to be there. And, like, we had one memorial service. He was a wonderful guy, but he was a mean driver. Like, he was just a mad driver. And every person we talked about is, oh, he was great, except when he was driving. So just think about, actually, it scares me. Every time I get mad at my kids, I'm like, oh, that's going in the memorial counseling session. And the last thing on the logistics is don't disappear. Don't disappear. Some people are not emotionally able to handle the terminal nature of someone they love, or they are afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. And so they just don't do or say anything. But from the perspective of someone who is dying, the people they thought they could rely on vanish from them. Stay with your loved ones. Stay engaged. And it is okay to ask them about the death or the diagnosis. Creating a narrative is how we process trauma and grief. Because so many people avoid talking about it because they don't want to make it worse, this is especially true of a sudden death, like especially a suicide or an accident or something. Ask them respectfully, if they are feeling like talking about it, to tell the story. Because when everyone avoids hearing the story in an attempt to not make the person more upset, it can create a situation where they feel like they're not allowed to talk about, and then they can't create the narrative. Does that make sense? And the last thing is, make sure you're not asking someone else to process your grief. Do you know, so the New York Times put this out years ago. It's called The Circles of Grief. If you leave with nothing else, leave with this. So at the center is the most grieved person. So the spouse, the parent, maybe the child. And then there is a next circle. So let's say it's a spouse who dies. A husband dies. So the other husband is grieving. He is allowed to dump everything that he wants to anybody he knows. And everyone in the next circle, their only job is to support him. So the husband's siblings support in. They cannot dump anything on him. But those siblings can dump anything they want on their spouses or their friends. Does that make sense? So each circle in and out, you support in, you dump out. Got it?
We are all dying. Our lives always moving toward completion. And we need to learn to live with death and to understand that death is not the worst of all events. We need to fear not death, but life, empty lives, loveless lives, lives that do not build upon the gifts that each of us have been given, lives that are like living deaths, lives which we never take the time to savor and appreciate, lives in which we never pause to breathe deeply. What we need to fear is not death, but squandering the lives we have been miraculously given. So let me die laughing, savoring one of life's crazy moments. Let me die holding the hand of one I love, recalling that I tried to love and was loved in return. Let me die remembering that life has been good and that I did what I could. But today, just remind me that I am dying so that I can live. savor, and love with all my heart.
I think there is something magic about people and spaces. I always wish families would dedicate or bless their house right after they move away. Houses are not just things. They are places in which you have existed and placed your energy and your love and your air. This church is a place where people have been in this exact space and a part of this congregation, and it has existed for decades. And you being a member and a part of this church means you are a part of that existence. Even if you have never met a person, being in the same space they occupied is profound and sacred. Over the summer, in the middle of my weird too many people died sabbatical summer, I got an opportunity to visit my family grave. It's a small plot of land with a giant sign that says Flanagan on it in New Orleans. I am not a Flanagan. I'm a Ryan. The person we are going to inter there, her last name is Kalak, my mom's maiden name. Her mom, my grandmother's mother's last name is Blewin, also not a Flanagan. So we don't actually even know how many people are in this plot. But I mean, I'm sure like they have the data somewhere deep in there. But so there's Kalak, Blewin, someone Flanagan, all in this one. This is like the most New Orleans story I've heard. We know there are at least 8 to 10 people there. The grave is tucked away in St. Patrick's No. 1 in New Orleans. It's a cemetery that started during the yellow fever epidemic. And the plots, I talked to the funeral director there, and she said she didn't say hate, but she really does not like, she called it her problem child of all of the graveyards. Because it started during the yellow fever, the graves aren't in a row. They're kind of just scattered all about, so you can't actually figure out where things were. We had to pull out a giant scroll with manually someone wrote down the names of every grave. The plot that my family owns is very understated. There's no crypt, there's no adornment other than the name on it, and an ambiguous urn that says, like a flower vase on the front that says mother, but we don't know which mother it is. It's in the last row that backs up to a fence, and on the other side of the fence is a Jewish cemetery. Seeing it and being there was profound and transformative. And there was something sacred about being able to place myself where my ancestors were and are. To tie all of this together, we are not individual people who are born. We are leaves on a tree. You have in your blood the DNA of your mother, even if you had an awful relationship with her. Even if you are still trying to reconcile anything that was hurtful or broken about your ancestors, you have that DNA in your body. And she has the DNA of your grandmother in your body, in her body. We are more connected than we realize. Also, we take up space. So own your space. Know your space. Know that even if you feel like you don't matter, that is never true. By virtue of you being born out of whatever that mystery we came from, we will return to it. You have a place in this world. It does not matter what your friends or family say. It does not matter what your government or the media says. You exist, you belong here, and that matters. Grief is proof of love. We grieve because of our caring for other people. And sometimes we grieve because we want to care about someone, but their brokenness or their addiction or their illness or just their meanness keeps us from connecting. But the desire is always there. It's like a kinetic grief energy. So over these next few days, pay attention to that magic. Pay attention to the fact that the veil is thin and that we can connect in ways that we may not normally be able to. And know that while the wave crashes on the shore for a short time, even though the wave exists for a short time, the water does not stop existing. Amen. Let's sing. I invite you to rise, body or spirit.
Now on land and sea descending brings the night its peace profound. Let our vesper hymn be blended with the holy come around. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, 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 amen. Soon as dies the sunset's glory, stars, for all. Cease we fearing, cease we grieving, quietly our burdens fall. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, amen. Now our wants and burdens leaving, do the care that cares for all. Cease we fearing, cease we grieving, quietly our burdens fall. Jubilate, 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 amen. Jubilate, 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 amen. As the darkness deepens o'er us, our eternal stars arise. Hope and faith and love rise glorious, shining in the spirit skies. Jubilate, jubilate, amen. Jubilate, jubilate, amen.
The world is better because you exist. Go make that true. Amen. Go in peace.